and that the collision between the two would actually create equality. This is the title of a monograph that we did recently by Ian Thun. It's a Swiss architecture firm, one of the most interesting Swiss firms, I think, because they're not so pure in the Swiss sense. But they're interested in the contradiction, because we're inevitably subscribed to contradictions by our lifestyles. We live in a capitalist economy that we know isn't sustainable, but we don't know what an alternative could be. We are killing our environment with every action daily, but we don't know how we could do otherwise. So we are a contradiction in adjecto, as they say in Latin. The interesting thing of this book was that we tried to say, okay, normally we don't like monographs of architecture because we think it's monographs have once been a very interesting type of book, but they have fallen this, the victim to a disease we call portfoliolitis. Architects just make portfolios. And then we said, okay, let's make an interesting monograph for these architects, and that means it cannot only be portfolio. That one would be the catalog part of the projects. This is what is orange here, but it also has to have something else. The something else is the yellow and the blue. Mostly the yellow. Developing the project, the catalog became bigger because architects have this sort of notorious obsession of fitting in more and more and more projects. But still we managed to basically make a project where the discourse played an important role in the entire book. Where you're not only having like big scale images, but also a lot of small images that give you references. And that give you also not only renderings and photographs, because these are the two types of images that are mostly used today in monographs, if you look at the Taschen monograph, but also then it gives you plans, diagrams, material samples, model photographs, site photographs of what the site looked before the building, site plans, sections, and so on. That is actually not usual. If you try to make an architectural monograph today with a generic publisher, they will basically say, no, let's not make plans and sections. Nobody will understand them anyway. And then we say, yeah, but some things in architecture you can only understand if you have a plan and section. And if people don't know how to read them, you have to basically find a way how to make it transparent and how to make it accessible. That's something I'll show you in a later project, that particular aspect. And we found something interesting in Ian Thun's office. They had these fantastic boards of architectural examples from history that were important for them. And they had fantastic topics under which they would regroup them. And we said, this is interesting. This stuff should be in your monograph. Forget about 5 projects of yours, but put this in. This displays your thinking. This is maybe much more important for an audience, because then they can understand what is interesting about architecture to you, instead of just showcasing your architecture. This is a type of image representation that is known in art history, invented by a guy called R.B. Warburg, and he called it the Atlas Mnemosyne. And when he did this in the 1920s and 30s, it was a radical departure from how paintings and architecture in art history were looked upon at that time, because at that time you would only study works of art from the same period and from the same kind of genre. So you would take 2 paintings of Dutch landscape painting and try to compare them and describe why they're different. But you would never take a Dutch landscape painting and then some kind of sculpture from the Polynesian islands and try to understand or explain similar systems of aesthetic design. R.B. Warburg invented this possibility of comparing the incomparable, and that's what we used as well in the book, where we basically made a long interview with them and forced them to talk about what kind of examples of architecture they actually were important for them in their own career, in the formation of their own understanding of architecture. And they brought together fantastic examples of buildings, some of them that I never knew. And we're actually talking about why they find them interesting and under what circumstances they have encountered those. And it's a brilliant excursion through their minds. You know, it's kind of being John Malkovich, but here it's like being Ian Turin. And simply to go through these pages and find this incredible collection of quite rarely to be seen architectural examples, at least sometimes, is worth the book for my mind. Also, at some point they slip in projects of themselves, where they, rather than say, for instance, that's John Soane's Bank of England, that's Herzog de Meuron's Reha-Klinik, and they say how they were fascinated by the possibility of the deep plan and how they were using it in a project of theirs, which is a transformation of a dairy factory, a former dairy factory, into an art school in Zurich. So this way you understand something about their architecture, but also something about architecture in general. And I think that's quite a nice way of a monograph, not only be this kind of one-man show, but actually bringing you closer to the discipline as such. And we produced this extremely long interview, which was a very interesting process with them. First, we made a real interview, then it was transcribed, and then it was montaged in a very long process with projects of themselves. And in the end, it became this book. So they learned something, we learned something as editors, and I also think the audience will learn something. And actually, basically, whenever we're asked by architects to make a monograph of their work, and we're doing this more and more frequently, because we also like to save the monograph from its own banalization, we always tell them, first of all, the monograph has to make sense for you. And then it will also make sense to somebody else. If you're only trying to impress somebody, forget it. You can do this yourself. And with this we're at the last project that I want to show you, which is actually a book that we've produced just a year ago. It's called People and Houses, and it was a very, very interesting and stressful project to some extent, because it was kind of a Palast Revolution, a palace revolution. We were asked by the House of Architects for a very interesting process that you guys actually have invented before, which is to make an architectural yearbook and an architectural award, not by a jury, but to be given out by an individual curator. Maybe they have copied you, I think this would be very good, because it's something that Austria needs. This kind of plurality of opinion, and not just the false democracy of juries. The book that they had before was this. It looked like this, which is to say, it looked like any architectural yearbook that you find in Germany, Austria, or somewhere else, Holland. It looked completely boring, not sensual, not enticing. I wouldn't buy the book. It had some meaningless graphics, too much information you don't want to know, not enough information that you want to know. For instance, these plans are all too small, quite clearly. This graphic shape is completely useless. The orange one, again, plans too small, then you show too many pictures that show the same, instead of showing one image really big. Again, some stupid orange background that kills the image anyway, too much white that nobody needs, and so on and so forth. And you can see it actually is a book that creates no narrative. It doesn't create an experience where you're curious to turn the page. Actually, here you're afraid of turning the page because you know what comes without having seen it. And the material represented doesn't bring you closer to the architecture. This is the biggest crime. That's what an architecture book has to do. It has to make me love the stuff that I'm looking at, or hate it passionately. But here I only hate it in a boring way. So what we then did is, and I need to change to this device. We said it first has to be a book not for the architects in the first place. It has to be a book. Wait a minute. Yeah, like this. It has to be a book that is interesting for people who would be theoretically interested in architecture but think that they are incompetent to understand it. It would be a book... They're not right. Okay, now it's right. It should be a book that allows lay persons that they can become clients, for instance, of architecture, in whatever scale. But it should be a book that basically is not about celebrating the architect and his fantastic capacities as a kind of a piece of worship, but it should celebrate architecture through its performance in everyday life. So what we did is basically we did a road trip through Styria. And so we started first not by architecture, but by moments of the landscape, because that's what you see when you go through Styria. And then, at some moment, something pops up, and you don't know whether this is already architecture. It could be, maybe it's not. In this case, it actually is. But we don't say here, watch out, project 1, look at it. The name's architect is this, the project's location is that, and all the kind of information stuff you were seeing before. No, we're not showing this. We're showing an opening shot, or an establishing shot, as you call it in movies, which is meant to pull you into the story. So we see this kind of small house, which is somewhere on the countryside. You see the small boy mowing the lawn, and before you know it, you're inside some story that you don't know yet how it turns out, but you're inside it. There's almost the same shot of this building, of this angle, without the boy, by usual architectural photographer, which keeps you totally indifferent. It's really interesting. And the building is the same. It is as good or as bad as it is here. But there's something missing that bridges the distance between the object that I'm looking at and myself. And this little boy bridges that difference. This little boy makes me aware, oh, I could also be mowing the lawn there. It could be, might be interesting. These photographic sequences always show the buildings in usage, and whenever possible, in usage by the people who use them daily, as clients, as inhabitants. This is really kind of a vacation home, somewhere in the countryside, for a family in Graz, who is not sure whether it wants to live in Graz all the time of their life, or whether they slowly want to move on the countryside, but as they're thinking that they're actually urban people, and that they cannot live on the countryside, they try to make it a smooth transition. One day more, and then finally they will end up as farmers, driving on their side with big trucks and enjoying country life. And all these pictures, they entail little moments of stories. Like, for instance, the husband, he wanted to have, from the architects, a bedroom where he could look out to the landscape and possibly see the rainbow. So we showed it, of course. It's a type of architectural photography that doesn't feel inclined to clean away the everyday dirt, to take away everyday objects like the wood basket, so that you don't destroy the sovereignty of the space. It's pictures where you don't need to Photoshop away the cables from the lamp hanging from the ceiling, because that's part of life, and that's perfectly fine. These are the kinds. And then there's one important moment which relates to what I said before about drawings, and how we can make drawings more accessible to non-architects. And I went through this experience myself as a non-architect, but I also learned to read a section, and I find it very enjoyable. I love to look at plans and navigate myself through the project by looking at a sequence of sections. And so it's learnable. I would teach it in school, but I'm not the cultural minister of Germany, but I think it should be done. What we do is some sort of an exercise in that direction. So for instance, we make these drawings. We have redone all the drawings based on the DVG files of the architects. We told them, send us your files, and we do the rest. And please don't interfere. It was very hard for Austrian architects to accept that they have no control of the way that they are communicated. And what we do, as you can see here, is we actually drew in the